Donald Trump was asked whether there was any room for negotiation or whether this was just take it or leave it for Hamas. And he said, well, there's not much room. It's pretty much take it or leave it.
This feels like a surrender document. A lot of the concessions that the press are claiming Israel's making will not feel like concessions at all. For example, Israel agrees to let in humanitarian aid. Getting food into people and not ethnically expelling them, that's not a concession, right? That's the bare minimum that you should have been doing anyway. At the root of the problem is that the Palestinians are not in the negotiation. The idea that you can negotiate a peace deal without having one side involved is kind of madness.
Yeah, yesterday. What did you make of it? So there's Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu in the Oval Office. They set out a 20-point plan for peace in the Middle East. My old friend Tony Blair, as we had previously suggested might happen, is named as being on this board of peace that will be chaired by Donald J. Trump if it comes to fruition. I think if is a big word in this. I sort of felt reading, I've read we'll put in the newsletter the full 20 points. I couldn't help reading it with a kind of Northern Ireland history kind of in my head. And virtually every point that is made, you keep thinking of who will have a problem with it, how difficult that might be. So listen, it was a big moment, and fair play, keep trying, but it's hard to be very, very optimistic.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the Northern Ireland thing, because that's the first thing that's so startling about it and must have surprised you reading it. So the first thing that's astonishing compared to Northern Ireland is that the Palestinians are not part of the negotiation. This is a peace deal that's been put together between Israel and the US. So imagine putting together a Good Friday Agreement, which the Republicans didn't get involved in negotiating, right? The IRA were not involved, Sinn Féin were not involved. But it's requiring Hamas to do all these things. In particular, disarm, get rid of weapons. Now, think about your Northern Ireland experience again. What did it require to get the IRA to agree to decommission weapons? Well, they had to feel that they had made a huge advance in terms of their political objectives to get rid of them. And there were still factions within them that didn't want to get rid of weapons. And there was a very, very difficult, long decommissioning and inspection process. Hamas is apparently supposed to get rid of all their weapons in 72 hours. Having achieved what exactly? And that's the next thing. Because this feels like will feel, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, to certainly somebody on the Hamas side, as a surrender document. A lot of the concessions that the press are claiming Israel's making will not feel like concessions at all. For example, Israel agrees to let in humanitarian aid, or Israel gives up on the idea of ethnic cleansing and expelling all the Palestinian population from Gaza. Well, many people, not just Hamas, many people in the world of even 9 months ago would say, hey, hold a second. Those are norms of international law, right?
Yeah.
Getting food into people and not ethnically expelling them, that's not a concession, right? That's the bare minimum that you should have been doing anyway in terms of your legal obligations. Now, what are the concessions that Netanyahu made? Well, he will make a lot of the fact that he had to apologize to Qatar for striking them, and he doesn't usually apologize. But again, what's that got to do with Palestine? Not much, really. It's about Qatar. Secondly, he's had to accept that if Hamas fighters lay down their arms, there could be an amnesty and some of them can leave. That might be unpopular with some people. And then there's some reference to a path towards a state. But I don't think anybody, even on the right of Israeli politics, is going to believe that any of this is a guarantee. And the final thing, back to you, is if you think about the Good Friday Agreement, how long it took and how many details there were. It wasn't a 20-point plan. Where are the guarantees? Right? This was the key point with your Good Friday Agreement. If people didn't do things, what are the consequences? Who's following up? What are the guarantees? If let's say Hamas releases all the hostages, and Israel then decides not to release the prisoners. Netanyahu says, for whatever reason, well, anyway, Hamas are a bunch of terrorists. They don't deserve to get themselves back. We've got our hostages back. They can go screw themselves. What are the consequences? What are the guarantees? That's
what I meant by, if you go through every single section of the plan, of all 20, in every one of them you can see what ifs that could lead to it being tipped up. So, for example, you mentioned Palestinian state, and just going back to Keir Starmer's speech, that was one of the standing ovations during the speech when he simply stated that, we now recognize Palestinian state. But Netanyahu has since done an interview, since being in the Oval Office and since doing the thing with Trump, where he's basically said there's no way there's going to be a Palestinian state. And the other point that you make about the complication of this, so I can't pretend to know as much about Hamas as I maybe do about Irish Republicans and the IRA, but the process by which the IRA took step by step to eventually saying, okay, we'll put arms beyond use, and then the decommissioning process, that was painful and it was slow and it was grinding. And Donald Trump did one of his little doorsteps just before Keir Starmer's speech. And he was asked by an American journalist, TV journalist, whether there was any room for negotiation or whether this was just take it or leave it for Hamas. And he said, well, there's not much room. It's pretty much take it or leave it. And of course, and the other thing that's happening now, so CBS ran a report. It was, I don't know who the source was, but it said a source involved in the negotiations. And I'm just thinking, well, CBS, maybe it's an American, says Hamas is leaning towards acceptance. And I thought, really? So I then sort of, called around a bit and spoke to a few people and read a few things. And I mean, the one that really leapt out at me was Hamas, a Hamas source, speaking to Reuters, and that, to my mind, usually means that it's somebody who knows somebody at Reuters, and Reuters trusts that person, and they've phoned them up. And they said this plan is completely biased towards Israel. It's imposed impossible conditions aimed at eliminating Hamas, and went on to say that all the Israeli demands have been met. There is no granting of legitimate rights to Gazans or Palestinians. And that may be a kind of exaggerated view, but you can see why they say that. And so this feels, I hate to say this because, I think people both think that we can't see any good in Trump. I'm glad that he's still engaged. I'm glad that he still thinks he can get people together and try and knock heads together and get it moving. But it feels like something that has given him the opportunity to say, I'm still working on this and here's a real thought through plan. And then to be able to blame Hamas if they come back and say, look, this is unacceptable.
Well, exactly. So that is going to be right at the heart of the story. So if Hamas rejects this, very, very quickly, the narrative coming out of Israel, the Israeli government certainly, will be, well, we offered them peace and they rejected it. So now we can continue doing whatever we're doing in Gaza, and it's Hamas's fault because we offered them a peace deal. And nobody will read the small print. Nobody will be interested in discussions about whether what they offered was reasonable. Nobody will be interested in the point that it wasn't actually negotiated with Hamas at all. The second question, though, which I think you pointed to when you talked about Netanyahu rejecting a two-state solution, is, let's say, in a sense, that's actually quite convenient for Netanyahu, Hamas rejecting this, because it might help him with his own coalition partners who are a bit iffy about some of this stuff.
Just on that race, Bezalel Smotrich, who's one of the two big hardliners, he and Ben Gvir, who really just don't want any truck with any talk of even being nice to the Palestinians, let alone giving them a state. And he has called this deal a tragedy of leadership that lacks true vision. So that's kind of where that side of the politics is coming at Netanyahu. And meanwhile, on the other side, of course, he's getting it from people trying to push him towards accepting the deal.
So let me just develop this. So there's meant to be 72 hours for Hamas to sign up. And if Netanyahu doesn't want them to sign up, all he has to do is keep making statements in that 72-hour period, saying things like there's never going to be a two-state solution, leaning into an Israeli interpretation of this document, making it seem more and more pro-Israeli and unattractive. And the result will be that he can force Hamas to reject it and then say, well, Hamas rejected it and we can continue. So one question will be, does Netanyahu want this to happen or not? Because if he doesn't want it to happen, there's an enormous amount that he can do to make it less likely that Hamas will sign up to it in terms of what he says between now and when they sign up. Now, let's just jump forward, though. Let's be optimistic for a second and assume that some agreement is reached. The next thing that I think we need to think about is your friend Tony Blair's vision And a lot of this comes from work that he was doing that was leaked and that the Financial Times replied to. A lot of this plan comes from his work. He basically is envisaging a technocratic Palestinian government, which oddly, or administration, which is not Hamas, but is also not the Palestinian Authority, which incidentally we all just recognized. So this hasn't been negotiated with the Palestinian state that France and Canada and Britain recognize, and the Palestinian state that France and Britain and Canada recognize not going to be running this thing. It's this technocratic thing. So, and then there's going to be an international supervision council. You talked about that, Trump and Blair. How much time are they going to spend on this? And what does it really mean that Trump's chairing this thing? Is he running Gaza? How much time is he going to put into that? Then there's an international security force, which looks like it's supposed to be Middle Eastern countries providing security. So it is, as we were discussing this a couple of days ago, has elements of the sort of things that happened in the 90s. So it feels a bit like the kind of projects that people were trying to do in East Timor, Timor-Leste, or Kosovo, Bosnia, or Cambodia. But the problem here is that in those situations, there wasn't Israel. This all stands or falls on Israel. You've got a massive military power right on your border who controls all the borders. So this document doesn't tell you, is the airport going to be opened? Is the port going to be opened? When is the Rafah border with Egypt going to be opened? At the moment, all access to Gaza will come through Israel. Israel retains the right at any moment, if they think the Arab Security Force is not doing a good job, to intervene, presumably bomb, send in special forces. Yeah. They will say very quickly, you said you'd disarm Hamas, you haven't. You said you'd get rid of the tunnels, you haven't. We can come in again, right? So imagine you're that administration. Pretty quickly, you're dealing with a place that's taken billions upon billions of dollars worth of damage. You have a very angry, traumatized population. They will be demonstrating in the streets. I saw this in Iraq, right? When we took over in Iraq, almost immediately, we couldn't get petrol to people. We couldn't get the schools up and running quickly enough. The electricity lines were coming down. I had thousands of people demonstrating outside my office. But I didn't have the added problem of people saying, and by the way, you're a puppet of an Israeli government. You're the puppet of what are basically our enemies next door. And the reason you're not doing these things for us is that you're working for their agenda.
I mean, in answer to your question, how much time will Donald Trump put into it? I mean, you know, he's a busy guy and he's the president of the United States. But I think one of the things that came across really strongly yesterday was the extent to which he wants to be seen to be the only person who can really sort this. And if you go through the paper, I mean, as you say, these are really, really, really difficult, complicated questions that are going to require some of the best brains in the world to try and actually get them to work. Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people in Gaza.
Can we do one at a time? Can I just stop you on that one? Let's do one at a time. I think it's really interesting. Okay, so a couple of questions on that. Who chooses these people? In other words, do they have legitimacy? Will the people of Gaza see these people as legitimate representatives? Number two, how do they deliver those services, get the schools up and running, get the hospitals up and running? What kind of civil service do they have? It was a Hamas civil service. So two questions for you. How are they chosen and how do they get anything done?
Well, the one I would add to that is in the context of where we are now, the concept of apolitical Palestinians is, I think, quite hard to get my head around that one. I mean, the answer to your question is that those questions have not been answered. Goes on. The committee will be made up of, this partly answers your question, but it doesn't answer it fully, of qualified Palestinians and international experts with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body. That's the body of peace, Trump, Blair, etc. The body will set the framework. This body, and I think that means the international body, will set the framework and handle the funding for the redevelopment of Gaza until such time as the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program as outlined in various proposals. So that is basically saying that the Palestinian Authority, which Israel thinks is just a complete sort of bunch of corrupt gerontocracy, which America has refused to give visas, is it the same Palestinian Authority or are we talking about a completely different Palestinian Authority?
So two more questions, I guess, that come out of that. Number one, what's the legal status of this body? I mean, if we were doing this in the 90s, there would be a lot of international lawyers thinking about international law, Right? Is this a UN body? No, because Trump and Israel don't like the UN. That would be the normal way to do it, right? Be UN body.
Although the UN are specifically named in relation to distribution of aid.
Yep, very good. They're doing their humanitarian stuff. But what's the legal status of this organization? In Iraq, remember, Bremer, the American representative, had to set it all up under Jay Garner and then Bremer under occupation law.
Yeah.
So they were formally the occupying power under international law with all the responsibilities that go with being the occupying power. Is this the occupying power? Or is Israel the occupying power that is granting power to this transitional authority to act on behalf of Israel? Next question. They say that they're going to have all the money. Where's the money coming from? Well, one thing we know about Donald Trump is he's not providing any money. One thing we know about Israel, they're not providing any money. They've made it completely clear that despite the fact that the reconstruction of Gaza is reconstruction against the bombing that Israel's done, there is nobody in the entire Israeli political spectrum that is suggesting we reconstruct. Now, remember that's another thing. I was reading quite good Times of Israel piece about this. When many people, if David Menzer, for example, will say, well, we're not doing anything different in Gaza from what the Americans and British did in Germany during the war. The difference is the British and Americans were committed to reconstructing Germany after the war. But Israel is not committed to reconstructing Gaza. So presumably the answer is they're hoping the money is going to come from the Gulf Arabs.
Well, hold on. The next paragraph, a Trump economic development plan to rebuild and energize Gaza will be created by convening a panel of experts who have helped birth some of the thriving modern miracle cities in the Middle East. I'm assuming this is the sort of stuff, the work that Jared Kushner's been doing. Many thoughtful investment proposals and exciting development ideas have been crafted by well-meaning international groups. It's become a bit of a word salad, this, and will be considered to synthesize the security and governance frameworks to attract and facilitate these investments that will create jobs, opportunity, and hope for future Gaza.
On that one, here are the questions then. So, what's the miracle? Well, the miracle presumably is Dubai. Yeah. What is Dubai? Dubai is above all about security. It's about international capital and visas, huge numbers of expatriates, and it's about very, very open trade and borders. Emirates Airline, huge international port. But the problem for Gaza is there's no security. The borders are controlled by Israel, and there's no suggestion that they're going to allow airports or ports to open. So how do you pull off the economic miracle?
You pull it off, Rory, by having a Trump economic development plan. It then says a special economic zone will be established with preferred tariffs get in here, preferred tariff and access rates to be negotiated with participating countries. No one will be forced to leave Gaza, and those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. Now, where it gets then, I think, really, really, really tricky. Okay, as if it isn't tricky already. Hamas and other factions, not named, agree to not have any role in the governance of Gaza directly, indirectly, or in any form. Now, just imagine the discussion that set off in Gaza and the West Bank and in Qatar now. Just imagine that. That is, Hamas and other factions agree not to have any role in the government's directly, indirectly, in any form. Any military terror and defensive infrastructure, including tunnels and weapon production facilities, will be destroyed and not rebuilt. There will be a process of demilitarization of Gaza under the supervision of independent monitors. Where do they come from? Which will include placing weapons permanently beyond use, that's the phrase that we used in Northern Ireland, through an agreed process of decommissioning, supported by an internationally funded buyback and reintegration program verified by independent monitors. New Gaza will be fully committed to building a prosperous economy and to peaceful coexistence with their neighbours. I mean, it's putting an awful lot on a lot of people to say, yeah, I'm going to go along with all of this.
Demobilization and disarming was done, obviously. You very much were involved in that in Northern Ireland. But it's something that requires security forces, requires police, requires armies. In the Balkans, it was done. The army was demobilized. But that had tens of thousands of international troops on the ground and a huge mandate mission around that. You controlled the borders in the case of the Balkans and in the case of Northern Ireland. And there was political will in the general population to drive ahead with that. So who is doing it? I mean, let's say a sort of provisional Hamas emerges, like a provisional IRA, and says, well, wait a sec, we don't like this deal. We're not disarming. Who's got the job of taking their arms away? Who's got the job of blowing up the tunnels? Now, ideally, from Trump and Netanyahu's point of view, they hope this is going to be the Arab Security Force. But that puts the Arab Security Force in an impossible situation because you're asking them to basically fight Palestinians, Arabs fighting Palestinians, and it will be presented as Arabs fighting Palestinians on behalf of Israel. So it'll be almost impossible for them to do that.
Well, again, this goes on to say the United States will work with Arab and international partners to develop a temporary international stabilization force to immediately deploy in Gaza. The ISF will train and provide support to vetted Palestinian police forces in Gaza and will consult with Jordan and Egypt, who have extensive experience in this field. This force will be the long-term internal security solution. The ISF will work with Israel and Egypt to help secure border areas along with newly trained Palestinian police forces. I mean, again, if we go back to the Northern Ireland, the concept of policing and who polices and where they come from and how they're trained, this is not going to get put together in a few days.
Just quickly on that one, I mean, I think you've made this point really powerfully, which is that we forget that the government in Gaza for the last 20 years has been Hamas. And Hamas is everywhere. I mean, people working in education departments, in municipalities are Hamas people. They defeated Fatah in an election, defeated the guys who were running the Palestinian Authority in election, and there was a civil war where Fatah and Hamas were killing each other. So your point has knobs on, right? Who are the new civil servants, and who are these police, and who are they associated with? And who supports them when they get into a fight? And how do you win the battle for hearts and minds? Because this is also a counterinsurgency campaign. It's a starved, traumatized population with huge resentments towards Israel and the international community. So how do you deliver development quickly enough to win them over? And that's what we failed to do in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, very quickly, people said, where are the jobs? And where will the jobs come from, right? There will be, I don't know, there'll be youth unemployment rates of 30, 40% in Gaza. Who's going to create those jobs? Doing what? And this is, look, let's say you and I suddenly got idealistic and wanted to move to Gaza and help with this project. Very quickly, you would realize that almost every conversation goes back to Israel. Right? Let's say you got tariff-free agreements to, I don't know, manufacture textiles in Gaza, or you were trying to run IT companies in Gaza, or you were trying to do transshipment trades of chips from China into Europe. And everything is stopped because the airports don't function, the borders don't function. Or let's say you've got migrant laborers trying to bring salaries in. It's all controlled by Israel. And Israel won't give up that control because if you hear it from their point of view, they see it as vital to their security that they don't give up that control.
Right. So it goes on. Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. As the ISF establishes control and stability, easier said than done, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, will withdraw based on standards, milestones and timeframes linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the IDF, the ISF, the guarantors and the United States, with the objective of a secure Gaza that no longer poses a threat to Israel, Egypt or its citizens. And just on that, the standards, milestones and timeframes, I mean, what are they? How do you negotiate each one? There were some maps produced with the paper, and it showed a sort of plan for how the Israelis might start to pull back. But what happens when there's a fight between some of the Israelis and some of the Palestinians? What's going to happen when the unexpected takes place, which is bound to do? So I think in all of this, it's all this written for a perfect world. This is a good plan, okay? But it is so not a perfect world, and I think that I'd love to think that the work has been done that answers these questions, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I guess we've probably driven our audience mad with our detailed questions. But if we just go back to the big picture, two quick observations. One of them is, remember, there were January and March ceasefire deals. And they basically said two things which have gone from this deal. In some ways, the deals got worse. In the earlier versions, Hamas were going to release their hostages at the same time as the Israelis released the prisoners. This requires Hamas to release its hostages before Israel released the prisoners. requires an element of trust, which wasn't in the earlier deals. Secondly, in those earlier deals, the answer to your question on when Israel withdrew, well, that was tied to the hostage release. Israel was going to get its troops out at the same time as the hostages were released. In fact, Hamas wasn't going to do any of these things until Israel withdrew. Now we've got a situation where Israel basically says, we're going to be there and we won't tell you how long. The final thing is, at the root of the problem is that the Palestinians are not in the negotiation. I mean, you don't have to be like a sort of super politically correct theorist of peace building to understand that the idea that you can negotiate a peace deal without having one side involved is kind of madness. And there's none of the international legal or UN structures around this. It's a real sign of how much the world has changed in the last 9 months that this is even conceivable as a deal. I mean, it's very, very weird that we're in a world now where we're sort of respectfully talking about something which I think even 12 months ago, the whole world would have been like, this is not the way you do peace deals.
Yeah. And of course, what happened on the back of it, I mean, they put a lot of work into this. I mean, the positive reactions sort of came out, flooding out straight away. But just because people react positively in the moment doesn't necessarily mean that these things are going to happen. And my final point, Rory, I don't know if you had time to read it, but I sent you an analysis piece from the Times of Israel. And it was clearly, I think, spun from the kind of, the Israeli government perspective. And the headline was, Netanyahu secures key edits to Trump plan to slow and limit Israel's withdrawal from Gaza. It says Netanyahu was bullish as he left the White House, and then goes through these areas. It's seen drafts that have then been slightly watered down. And Netanyahu did a video. Now the whole world, including the Arab and Muslim world, is pressuring Hamas to accept the terms that we created together with Trump to bring back all the hostages, the living and the dead, while the IDF stays in the majority of the Strip. And then he said in Hebrew, who would have believed it? In other words, trying to give the sense to the Ben-Gvirs and the Smotrich, I've got everything that you guys wanted me to get.
Just on the comments, just to bring in the live audience a little bit, Ronnie Fahy has written in just a minute ago saying, it's pretty sick how your hatred for Trump overpowers your basic humanity. It's progress. And the international community on both sides back, but you cannot for a second give some kudos. And then Vasilis Antonopoulos, if you think nothing will work, what do you propose? Okay, my answer to that is we do know how these things are done. And the answer is you have a proper process in which you involve the Palestinians. It's not rocket science. The idea that you can get a peace deal basically taking the demands only from one side is completely mad. It would be like making a Northern Ireland peace deal, which was written by the British and the Unionists. It would be like, a Balkans peace deal just written by the Bosniak Muslims. Secondly, you get the international legal structures and the UN involved. You don't hatch it up as a deal between Netanyahu and Trump and then give all the cards to Netanyahu to determine whether or not it's accepted. So the fact that it's pushing for peace is not enough for us to say, this is a good deal. There are many alternatives.
No, and also, I sort of acknowledged the first point. I actually said that I think a lot of our listeners probably do think that we're so sort of biased against Trump that we can't see any good in him, which is why 2 or 3 times I've said, actually, I think it is a good thing that they keep trying, that they keep going. But I think it is when you're talking about something as important as this, on a day, by the way, that the numbers of people who have died of malnutrition in Gaza has now reached 453, 150 of them children, 70,000 deaths, then I think we're entitled to probe and press the detail of something, which I do welcome. I do welcome the fact that they've set out this plan. I think it is not unreasonable then to say, okay, these are the questions that flow from it. And therefore, I think that in terms of, what would we do? I think you would try to build proper international support for the sorts of things that are in this plan. What you can't do is just say, this is what we think should happen, and therefore it will happen. Life doesn't work like that.
And politics, we are the rest is politics, are at the core of this, which is, it can't just be technocratic. There needs to be a Palestinian authority with legitimacy that Palestinians can get behind. Right now, obviously, that's not going to be a Hamas government. But it's at the very least, we've recognized the Palestinian state should be the Palestinian Authority. Saying there's not going to be a Palestinian Authority until the Palestinian Authority reforms. And saying that allowing food in is something that they will allow as a sort of condition if they sign up for the peace deal is complete sign of how far backwards we've gone. No. That food, that humanitarian support should be there today, should have been there 3 months ago, and it is the most disgusting moral blackmail to be saying we're going to continue to starve you unless you sign up to this plan. Final one, sorry, just to quote Maxine Thompson, who came in, like Trump and Putin regarding Ukraine, or Matt Lang, just like Russia and the US deciding to invade Ukraine. We were very, very clear that the problem with Trump sitting down with Putin is that Zelensky wasn't in the room. The problem with Trump sitting down with Netanyahu is the Palestinians are not in the room.
But you weren't very happy about Tony Blair's role in all this, were you? Be honest.
No, I thought I thought it was extraordinary that he would do this. I think it goes against what he learned in Northern Ireland, goes against what he would have learned painfully in Iraq. I guess will go against the instincts of Jonathan Powell, National Security Advisor. And I think it's a very strange thing for him to do. Puts him in a very exposed position, the basic way I'd frame it is this, that if he does this, Tony Blair will have responsibility without power. The power will remain with Israel, and he'll be carrying the can for things that he can't implement.
Yeah. Well, I just think it shows his continuing commitment to public service, home and abroad. What a fine man. Anyway, listen, thank you everybody for joining us. I hope we've informed, elucidated, and I don't know, provoked a bit of thought.
Well, you certainly will have provoked everybody with your final praise of Tony Blair, who I fear is not quite as popular as he is with you. Right. Okay. Thank you, Alastair, very much. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.